The name of this blog is called the Kobrakatensky Files. This word is derived from Quechua, and it means time of fear. Peruvians use this word to describe the internal conflict that occurred between the 1980s to the early 2000s. This is what many people considered a civil war, but it was fought by the radical left and the radical right. This all started in the 1980s, when Peruvians were left in shambles because of the political unrest that was occurring at the time. There were many failed presidencies, coups, and natural disasters that left the economy in ruins. Peruvians didn't know who to trust or what to do, which left it vulnerable for communist guerrilla warfare attacks. One of the most infamous communist guerrilla warfare groups at the time was called the Shining Path. This party was led by Abimael Guzman. He recruited many people into his group, and later him and his followers would kidnap, torture, and murder his victims. Because of the fear that many Peruvians felt, they voted in a man who promised to fix all their problems. This man was called Alberto Fujimori. Alberto Fujimori promised to end the rule of Sendero Luminoso, and he promised to fix the economy. And he did just that. He captured Abimael Guzman, which led the Shining Path Party to go into hiding. And he also fixed the economy. Peruvians were happy again and they were thriving again, but it didn't last for long because he was secretly committing human rights violation. And it was later caught on camera that he was accepting bribes. Peruvians were devastated and they did not know what to do. Alberto Fujimori was exiled and he ran away to Japan to live out his days. Now, these two people, Abimael Guzman and Alberto Fujimori, are no longer in power. But what they did is still remembered today. They had many victims, and many of his victims still remember what they did. The damage caused by both of them can never be repaired. And it has left a mark on Peru that victims to this day remember.
Well, in the case of Peru, after everything that happened for the terrorism, the government implemented a comprehensive reparation plan, where the main thing was to help all of these victims at this moment. For me and my group, what was done was fine, but the plan have to be followed and not stop, because that people need it in that moment. Well, more psychological attention, of course, have to be increased in these people, and in addition, the material repair, the financial support in that time was essential for us. But, well, in a short time, the government decided to stop for this help. Well, today per today, us see the consequence.
The Peruvian armed force acted by the defensive way because they couldn't know by precision if someone was a terrorist or a civilian, due to the fact that all the people were mixed, and there wasn't the today social media tools we have to know who we are at least. So it was really hard to analyze who could be part of the real problems, the real deal. Nevertheless, there were back acting from Grupo Colina, which was part of the anti-subversive fight in 1991, causing the Versailles massacre. There were other organizations like Hail that made an important move, capturing the Shining Path leader Edmund Guzman in 1992. These operations were called the Operación Victoria and took a lot of months to develop well because uh, they spent like months analyzing all the stuff they have about this leader, because in those days people didn't know who was Abimael Guzman until they find them in 1992.
So it's also important to talk about what we need to do to prevent this from happening again, right? So first, we have to talk about the reasons why this happened in the first place. The main one being, obviously, people involved in this were terrible people and caused so much hurt and fear in our country. And this is in no way trying to justify their actions and what they did. But we also need to think more deeply into this problem and about the factors that might have had some sort of influence in the beginning of this horrible period of time if we don't want it to happen again. One of the factors being the huge inequality there is in our country and the sadness and hatred this can cause in people that live in places that are forgotten or not paid as much attention as Lima, which can cause violence. So this is why we need to work towards equality and justice in our country, and obviously the government must pay attention to all the provinces and cities and in our country and their struggles. So we need to work towards justice, equality, so, as a society and the government as well, if we really want this to not happen ever again.
The conflict caused 70,000 of fatalities. However, thousands of women suffer different forms of sexual violence. And the common term of all gender violence is to think of women for reproductive, biological, and sexual purposes. Back in the conflict years, their role was summarized only to this, objectifying women and leaving them in the hands of the figures of authority and power that was reflected in the patriarchy, that becomes mothered through the generals, senderistas, and the doctors who carry out forced sterilizations. Within gender violence, there was discrimination based on intellect and socioeconomic capacity, since the sterilizations were not made in the wealthiest districts of Lima, but in the most distant villages. The testimony of Dionisia Calderano, a victim of rape by the senderistas, militares, and ronderos, explained that the survivors were submitted to subjugation procedures through deceptions and promises. Phrases such, "I will give you a bag of noodles if you go with me to the medical center," took advantage of their situation of extreme poverty and hunger. In addition to this, according to her, there was family violence, jealousy on the part of the husband for the ligature, violence on the part of the community. "You're like a mule, you cannot give birth anymore," is what they said to these women. Armed conflicts are devastating. They cause dehumanization, the annihilation of population, and the exacerbation of sexual violence imposed by psychological oppression, threats of arrest, and abuse of power. And that is what is less talked about. We have to remember and never forget these horrible events, so the bodies of women and girls are no longer war fields.